My phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning. I was still in my robe, sitting on my sister's porch in Baton Rouge, watching the sun come up over the oak trees, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw my son's name on the screen, something in my chest told me to pick up. Dad. His voice was tight. Not scared exactly. More like a man trying very hard not to sound scared. She's at the house. The other house. The one on Clover Street. I set my coffee down slowly. Tell me exactly what's happening. I got a call from Mr. Patterson next door. He said her car was in the driveway. Dad, she had someone with her, a man he didn't recognize. They were around back near the side door to the garage. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked out at those oak trees, at the Spanish moss hanging perfectly still in the early morning air, and I thought, so it's finally happening. Dad, you still there? I'm here, son, I said. I'm here. Now listen to me carefully. Don't go over there. Don't call her. Don't do anything. You let me handle this. But Dad, that house, everything in that. Marcus. I used the voice I hadn't used since he was 16 and had taken my car without asking. Trust me. This is exactly what I planned for. He went quiet. And in that quiet, I could hear him breathing, trying to steady himself, trying to trust his old father one more time. I hoped I deserved it. I hung up and sat there another minute, just me and the cold coffee and the oak trees. Then I picked the phone back up and made 3 calls. The first to my attorney, Gerald Whitmore, who had been handling my affairs for 22 years and knew exactly what to do without me explaining much. The second to a man named Dion, who ran a property management company and had a key to that house. The third to my sister inside, to tell her I needed to cut my visit 2 days short. By the time I was on the highway heading back to Atlanta, everything was already in motion. Let me back up because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand who my daughter-in-law was before you can understand what she was doing at that house on Clover Street. Her name was Renata. Marcus had met her 3 years earlier at a fundraiser for a children's hospital downtown, which, looking back, I realized was the perfect place for someone like her to be. Surrounded by people with money, all of them feeling generous, none of them thinking too hard about who was in the room with them. She was beautiful. I won't deny that. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the most interesting person she'd ever met. When Marcus brought her home for Sunday dinner the first time, she complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about my years working in logistics, and helped clear the table without being asked. My late wife Eleanor would have liked her, I thought, and that made me want to like her too. But there was something. A small thing. The kind of thing you only notice if you've spent 63 years learning to pay attention. When she didn't think anyone was watching, when Marcus had stepped out to take a call, when my back was turned at the kitchen counter, her eyes moved differently. They moved around the room the way an appraiser's eyes move, cataloging, calculating. I told myself I was being an old, suspicious fool. The second time I noticed it was when Marcus mentioned casually that he'd taken her to see my property on Clover Street. I owned that house outright, bought it 12 years ago as an investment, kept it rented for a while, then let it sit empty the last 2 years while I decided what to do with it. Marcus knew about it the way children know about their parents' business, generally without details. She really loved it, Marcus told me over the phone, and I could hear the smile in his voice. She said it had great bones. She asked if it might be something we could eventually, if things got serious. I was quiet for a moment. She asked that? She was just wondering. No pressure. Of course, I said. No pressure at all. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I called Gerald and asked him to pull together some documents I'd been putting off. They got engaged 8 months later. I smiled, shook Renata's hand, and told her she was welcome in our family. I meant it, or I wanted to mean it. I was still hoping I was wrong. The prenuptial agreement was my first real test of her. I had Gerald drafted carefully, protecting certain assets, The Clover Street property, a portion of my investment accounts that I'd already designated for Marcus in my estate plan. I told Marcus directly, "Son, I need you to ask her to sign this before the wedding. Not because I don't trust her, because it's the responsible thing to do, because your mother and I built these things over 40 years, and it's my job to make sure they go where they're supposed to go." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Dad, she's not like that." "Then she won't mind signing." To her credit, Renata barely blinked. She signed the agreement at Gerald's office on a Tuesday afternoon with a pleasant smile and a hand that didn't tremble. She asked only one question, and it was the question that confirmed everything I had quietly suspected for a year. She pointed to the clause about the Clover Street property and said, "Just so I understand, this one won't be transferred to Marcus under any circumstances?" Gerald looked at me. I looked at her. "That property is held in a separate trust," I said pleasantly. "It's already designated, just a formality in the paperwork." She nodded and signed, but the question stayed with me the way a splinter stays under the skin, invisible, but always there. They married in June. It was a beautiful wedding, I'll say that. 200 people, a reception at a hotel in Buckhead, flowers everywhere. I danced with my sister and thought about Eleanor, and tried to be happy for my son. The first year of their marriage, things seemed fine. Marcus was working hard at his firm. Renata had a job in marketing, though she mentioned several times that she was reassessing her career path. They lived in a condo Marcus owned in Midtown, which was perfectly nice but apparently, according to Renata, not quite right. Too much street noise, not enough closet space. The building didn't have a proper gym. She started talking about the house on Clover Street about 6 months in. Not directly to me, she was too smart for that. She mentioned it to Marcus, who mentioned it to me, who said nothing. She suggested, apparently, that since the house was sitting empty, it was such a waste, that a young couple starting out could really make use of a 4-bedroom home, that she'd already looked into what updates it might need. I listened to my son relay these conversations with the patience of a man who has been waiting a long time for something he already knows is coming. "Dad, she's not wrong that the house is just sitting there." "It's not just sitting there, Marcus. It's in a trust. There's a plan for it." "What kind of plan?" "The kind that's already been made," I said gently. "Tell her I appreciate her interest." I could tell from his silence that this answer did not satisfy Renata. When he passed it along, things shifted after that. Not dramatically. Renata was far too careful for drama, but the texture of our interactions changed. The warmth dialed down a few degrees. She began asking questions that were really just statements dressed up politely. Questions like, "Have you thought about simplifying your estate, Raymond?" And, "My cousin is a financial advisor. I'd love to connect you two sometime." And once, memorably, "You know, some people find that when they get older, managing multiple properties becomes more trouble than it's worth." I would smile and nod and say something non-committal, and then I would go home and call Gerald. The trust was already in place, had been for 2 years. The Clover Street property was in it, along with a portion of my other holdings. The beneficiary was Marcus, structured in a way that protected the assets from any claims that might arise from a dissolution of his marriage. Gerald had explained it to me carefully, and I had listened carefully because I had seen enough of life to know that hope is not a plan. But here's what Renata didn't know, what nobody knew except me and Gerald, is what was inside the house on Clover Street. Specifically, what was inside the locked cedar chest in the back bedroom closet. I had started keeping a record 3 years earlier, almost from the moment I first noticed those appraiser's eyes moving around my living room. Not a diary exactly. More like a logbook. Every conversation that struck me as odd. Every question that was a little too pointed. Every moment I saw Renata's mask slip just slightly. The flicker of frustration when I changed the subject. The way she leaned in a little too eagerly when money came up. The afternoon I overheard her on the phone. Voice low, saying to someone, "It's more complicated than I thought. He's got everything locked up, but I'm working on it." I wrote it all down. Dates, times, direct quotes when I had them. I kept the logbook in the cedar chest, along with copies of every document Gerald had prepared, a letter I had written to Marcus to be opened when the time was right, and a small photograph of Eleanor that I kept there because it felt right. Because she was the one who taught me that protecting your family sometimes means being the one willing to see clearly when everyone else wants to believe. I never told Marcus the chest existed. I never told him what was in it. I told him only one thing about Clover Street, and I told him early, and I told him once. That house has everything you'll need, son. When the time comes. He thought I meant the house itself, the square footage, the good neighborhood, the equity. He didn't understand yet. But he would. When I got back to Atlanta that afternoon, Gerald met me at the house on Clover Street. Dion was already there. The side door near the garage, an old utility entrance that most people didn't know about, showed signs that someone had tried to work the lock. They hadn't gotten in. The lock was a commercial-grade deadbolt I'd installed 2 years ago, specifically because I had a feeling about this property, about who might eventually take an interest in it. She brought a locksmith, Dion said, showing me the marks on the plate. Professional job, not just someone messing around. They knew what they were doing. I nodded slowly. But they didn't get in. No, sir. That lock held. I thanked Dion, waited for him to leave, and then stood in the house for a while by myself. I walked through the rooms. The living room with its tall windows. The kitchen I'd once considered renovating. The hallway where Eleanor's sister used to hang her coat when she visited back when we first bought the place. And I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Not even satisfaction exactly. More like the particular peace that comes when something you have long prepared for finally arrives. I went to the back bedroom. Opened the closet. The cedar chest was exactly where I'd left it. Undisturbed. I ran my hand across the top of it, and then I took the key from my keychain and unlocked it. Everything was there. I called Marcus that evening and asked him to come over. Not to Clover Street, to my home. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept, which I suspected was accurate. Where is she? I asked. Home. She doesn't know I'm here. He sat across from me and put his hands on his knees. He was 41 years old, my son, but right now he looked younger. He looked like the boy who used to sit in that same chair and tell me about problems at school, waiting for me to tell him what to do. Dad, I need you to tell me what's going on. All of it. All right, I said. I will. I told him everything. I told him about the conversation at Gerald's office, the question she had asked about Clover Street. I told him about the overheard phone call. I told him about the logbook, what was in it, every entry, every date. I watched his face as I talked, watched him move through disbelief and pain and something harder and quieter at the end. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. The chest, he finally said. You've had all of this for 3 years. I started keeping records the year you started dating her. I hoped I'd never need them. But you prepared anyway. That's what fathers do, Marcus. We hope for the best. We prepare for the truth. He was quiet again. Then, she asked me last week if I'd talked to you about transferring the Clover Street deed directly into both our names. I know. Gerald told me she'd had a real estate attorney reach out to inquire about the trust structure. His jaw tightened. She told me it was just, I know what she told you. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbors' kids were riding bikes in the last of the evening light, the way children do in that particular hour before their mothers call them in. He watched them for a while. What's in the letter? He asked. The one in the chest. I had kept one document out and placed it on the table between us. I hadn't opened it. That was for him to do. He came back from the window and sat down, and he picked it up, and he read it. I watched him read it. The letter was everything I hadn't been able to say out loud across 3 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings and careful, loving silence. It was the story of how his mother and I had built what we built, not through luck or inheritance, but through 40 years of choosing each other, of making decisions together, of protecting what was ours not because we were greedy, but because we understood that what you build is a reflection of what you value. It was a letter about what love actually looks like from the inside. Not flowers and grand gestures, but the daily, undramatic choice to be trustworthy, to be honest, to protect the people who are counting on you even when it costs you something. And at the end, I had written, I am not giving you these things so that you will be wealthy, Marcus. I'm giving you these things so that you will understand what they cost, and so that you will know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you might one day be worth. He folded the letter carefully when he finished. He didn't look up right away. She's never going to change, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I don't know that, I said honestly. But I know she tried to break into a house that wasn't hers. And I know that's not the first time she's tried to take something that wasn't hers. What you do with that, that's your decision. You're a grown man. I'm not going to make it for you. He nodded. But you're going to support me. Whatever I decide. Whatever you decide, I said. That's what I'm here for. He filed for divorce 4 months later. It was not simple, and it was not painless, and there were weeks I could hear in his voice that he was struggling in ways that fathers aren't always equipped to fix. But he got through it. The prenuptial agreement held. The trust held. The Clover Street property, which Renata's attorney made one last attempt to include in the asset division, citing some creative theory about implied intent, was ruled entirely outside the scope of the proceedings, exactly as Gerald had structured it years before. Renata got what she had come into the marriage with, and not a dollar more. Oh, I heard through Marcus later that she had told someone in her circle that she'd been cheated, that the family was secretive, that there had been assets hidden from her. I thought about that for a while, and then I let it go. The house on Clover Street is Marcus's now. I transferred it to him outright the year after the divorce was finalized, because that had always been the plan. The real plan, not the one Renata had been trying to scheme her way into. He's been working on it slowly, the way you work on something you actually intend to keep. New floors in the kitchen. The back porch repaired. He called me one Saturday to help him choose paint colors, and I drove over and we spent 3 hours debating shades of white, which is exactly the kind of afternoon I'd spent 40 years hoping to have with my son. He's doing well now. He's cautious in the way that people who have been hurt become cautious, not closed, but careful. That's not the worst thing. Careful is survivable. Careful keeps you from making the same mistake twice. The cedar chest is still in that back bedroom. The logbook is still in it, along with Eleanor's photograph and a few other things I've added over the years. I lock it every time I leave. Marcus knows it's there now. He's asked me once if he should read the whole logbook, all the entries. I told him he was welcome to. But I also told him that sometimes the most important thing about keeping a record is not the reading of it, but the keeping, the discipline of paying attention, of writing down what you see clearly, without letting hope or love or wishful thinking soften the edges of the truth. His mother taught me that. She had the clearest eyes of anyone I've ever known. She could see people, really see them, in a way that had nothing to do with cynicism and everything to do with love. Because when you truly love someone, you see them as they are, not as you need them to be. And you make your decisions accordingly. I keep her photograph in that chest because she deserved better than to be forgotten, and because every time I open that lock, I want to remember who taught me that protecting your family isn't something you do with your fists or your voice. You do it quietly. You do it early. You do it with patience and paperwork and a cedar chest in a back bedroom that nobody can get into without the key. And you do it with love, the real kind. The kind that doesn't ask what it's going to get in return. That's the only legacy that matters. That's the one she can never take.